Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where Dr. Disha Spath will be your companion on this exciting financial adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms.
Welcome back to another episode of Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. I'm your host, Dr. Disha Spath, and today we're diving into a topic that has sparked significant discussion and concern in the medical community. We're joined by a returning guest, Dr. Tarang Patel, a hospital-employed radiologist with a rich background that includes service in the U.S. Air Force and coming on this podcast to talk about controversial topics. So get ready. Dr. Patel has been a voice of reason and insight on this podcast, especially when it comes to personal finance and professional development for physicians. Today, however, we're shifting gears to discuss a critical issue raised in the recent article, The Miseducation of America's Nurse Practitioners. This piece sheds light on the increasing reliance on nurse practitioners who in some cases may not be adequately trained to handle the complexities of patient care, especially in specialized and emergency settings. We'll explore the implications of this trend, what it means for patient safety, and how it impacts the broader healthcare landscape. So welcome back, Dr. Patel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is number 3, I think.
Yeah, I know. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yes.
I love talking to you. For those who might be new listeners, can you briefly reintroduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a radiologist in Arizona. Well, I run a financial Facebook group. I used to do a podcast with the same name, Dr. Money Matters. I'm pretty active on social media talking about finances, physicians, some of the downfalls of poor investments, and sometimes goes into the way that insurance companies deal with us, the way health systems deal with us. And I'm wanting to be a voice, an advocate for physicians, because sometimes I feel like even our own physician colleagues don't always have our best interests at heart.
Doc on doc crime, as Dr. Nirav Shah calls it. Yeah. And there's a lot of that. And I want this episode not to be a practitioner on practitioner crime kind of episode, but more just to talk about this article and the increasing numbers of NPs and PAs in healthcare and what that means for patients, what that means for us as MDs, but also what that means for these NPs and PAs that are coming out of training and being thrown into this crazy healthcare landscape that we have. So let's dive into that. So this recent article was shared widely on social media amongst the MD circles and DO circles. This is my world that I live in, and it somewhat dominated the feeds for a little while. And it really seemed to sort of resonate with our community. So let's talk about a little bit of it. It started off with a patient case where a patient was hyperglycemic with a glucose of 582, and an NP saw him in the ER and sent him home. And unfortunately, he died of DKA. And there was a lawsuit that said, basically the patient should have been admitted and given insulin and fluids. And, brings to light a lot of issues that come along with using physician extenders like NPs and PAs. Of course, now in today's healthcare, the term mid-level or physician extenders is somewhat frowned upon. We're all being labeled as equivalent providers or, advanced practitioners. There's a milieu of words that people like to throw out. But let's get down to the facts of it. In this article, it states, a nurse practitioner is the fastest growing profession in the country, and the ranks are expected to climb by 45% by 2032. After getting an advanced degree, typically a master's or doctorate in nursing, nurse practitioners are often allowed to treat patients in the same ways medical doctors do, and in several states without any oversight by physicians. So patients tend to like this because they get care sooner. It does expand access to care in certain regions. The interesting thing is that the nurse practitioner schools are pumping out a lot of graduates, and this article points out that a lot of these schools don't reject anyone. One of the directors of a NP program quoted in this article says that she doesn't recall denying any acceptance to a single student. So there are 600 NP schools in the US with graduating advanced nursing degrees. That's triple the number of med schools training physicians. There were more than 39,000 NPs graduated in the 2022 class, up 50% from 2017. So, Tarang, let's hear your thoughts. What do you think about this large number of NPs coming out of schools and largely outpacing medical doctors?
I mean, the whole concept was started because of, like you said, access to care and not enough physicians. Particularly, it was initially, I think, more geared towards primary care and to supplement the lack of primary care, particularly in the rural and underserved areas. And, admirable goals. But just like anything, money gets involved, and educational institutes, whether they're the prestigious Ivy League institutes or the elite medical training institutes or any regular state university or online school, everyone wants a piece of the pie. And they see education in these fast growing healthcare fields as a way that they can make money. In medicine, historically, there was a proliferation of schools way back in the 1800s and early 1900s that were of variable quality. And, you could have gone to an elite school like Harvard and had a completely different experience than a rural country school somewhere in the middle of the country. And there was no guidelines to police these things. And then somewhere in the early 1900s, a report came out called the Flexner Report, which basically trashed almost all the medical training programs in the country, saying that, these were subpar, not scientific based, and there was no rigor involved. And a lot of these schools shut down because of the power of this report. We haven't had any of that in the nurse practitioner world or the other health allied professions world. They've just been opening and opening and opening. And if I recall, one of the quotes in the article was about, like you said, they don't recall turning anyone down. One had a 96% admission rate. And with the sheer numbers of people applying, and then not turning anyone down, that just seems to me like, are you really even looking? Do you care? No, you just want tuition dollars. And then a lot of them don't have adequate training facilities. They're set up on their own to go find rotations if they do. There's no real assessment of that quality. I don't blame people for seeking out pathways to improve their career. So this is not a criticism of those in the nurse practitioner field. They don't know what they don't know because they haven't been taught that. So it's a criticism of the health industrial complex, whether it's the educational systems, whether it's insurance always ratcheting down, whether it's the government who wants to reduce costs at any possible non-financial cost and even financial cost. It's a combination of all those things. So I think that we are on the verge. This Bloomberg article is just one of many recent reports kind of coming out in the mainstream that is finally addressing this. But it's probably going to take a congressional hearing to really bring this to an attention. And unfortunately, those things don't happen until there's either a slew of, catastrophic outcomes, or there is someone in the government high position who, suffers a consequence. I'll give you an example. In New York in the 80s or early 90s, when residency hours were unregulated and, residents were working ridiculous hours, there was a case in which I think it was, I may be mistaking the exact details, but it was the daughter or relative of the editor of the New York Times who suffered.
Was it Libby Zion?
Yeah.
Libby Zion that you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. And they suffered a catastrophic outcome, the New York Times, which obviously has a massive platform. And the editor used that platform to advocate for change and bring the attention to everyone. It takes those kind of things, and then down the line, we reduced, training hours and things. And it takes that kind of thing for this to occur. We haven't had that yet. There's been, I'm sure, any physician practicing can count the number of near misses. That's not just a criticism. We all have mistakes, but there's a difference between a mistake and just being undertrained.
As a primary care physician, first of all, I want to push back on the fact that NPs can replace PCPs. And this is a completely biased PCP opinion, of course. But in my experience being an internist, we need to know a little bit about a lot of things, and like the major things not to miss about the entire medical field, right? All the specialties. And there's like a vast amount of knowledge that you need to be exposed to. And then each person that walks in has this unique diagnosis, or maybe a collection of diagnoses, but you need to be able to recognize it. And it's the lack of recognition, the lack of exposure that really shows in primary and emergency care. But in specialty care, you have a smaller set of diagnoses and potential things that you need to know. And I think that's why a lot of the NPs that come out of training do primary care initially and then quickly pivot to a specialty practice because, number one, I'm not saying that they have to know less. They have to know a lot more about a few conditions, but it's easier to put someone that's less trained in that position of being the primary person to work the patient up or, do the follow-ups because you have a smaller set of differential diagnoses that they need to work with.
I will agree and disagree with you on a couple of those things. I completely agree that primary care physicians need to know a vast set of differential and vast set of presentations. And I mean, no way indicating that a nurse practitioner training is equivalent to that of a 3-year residency, whether it's in internal medicine, family medicine, whatever. There's no way. You can't, it's not even a close comparison. So I completely agree with you there. I will push back a little bit on the sense that the same thing is applicable, even though it's a smaller knowledge pool. The additional training for the specialists, whether it's in surgery, whether it's an internal medicine subspecialty, whatever, it's still a long extended period. Yes, you may focus in on more specific diagnoses, but even in that scenario, it is a broad spectrum because the human body it's an infinite presentation of these things. So I will agree that nurse practitioners, PAs, whoever don't have the same level of expertise in any of these fields. What's happening, and I think this is the issue, the crux of the matter, is that their organizations, not them individually, but their organizations are pushing and pushing and pushing for autonomous practice without supervision, claiming equivalency. And that may be on the primary care level, that may be on the specialist level. It doesn't really matter. It's claiming equivalency. And we as physicians know there's no possible way because forget medical school, they didn't complete any of the residency training. And now they have, some shortened pathways. You can't combine everything into 1 year, whether it's gastroenterology, neurology, whatever. So there's no possible way that anyone can claim equivalence to what we've undergone.
Yeah, so let's talk some numbers. A primary care physician, a family medicine doctor, an internal medicine doctor has at least 18,000 clinical hours under their belt, at least, right? And that's if they aren't working more than their regular scheduled hours, and most of the time they are, as compared to NPs that have a mandated 500 hours. 500 versus 18,000 hours. There's no equivalency there. And top that off with these schools that are pumping out NP graduates are not providing the trainers. They're not providing the people to train these NPs. So routinely, I get emails, just cold calls from NP students looking for clinical hours in their primary care hours. And when they do this, I'm required to fill out a form for the school that basically lists my training and make sure, I don't have any pending actions or whatever. I submit it. Then I train this person. They come to me. They follow me around, but there's no guideline to how I train them. They're generally not expected to go into the patient room, talk to them, or come up with a differential like a med student would. They're generally just shadowing, which is what a pre-med student might do. They're not actively involved in managing the patient at all. They're just watching me talk to the patient. They're watching me, come up with a differential. Then I'll try to teach them something while they're with me and we're typing up the note. But I'm doing all of this while I'm seeing patients, which cuts down on my productivity and how fast I can be, with zero compensation. And then after that, I'm supposed to send, a review of the patient to the NP school. And again, zero compensation, no title. Why would I do that? I don't even get the title of professor.
Yeah.
And you have these people coming to you begging you, which is really sad. And I've done this for a couple of people that I know personally, family members or people that I generally I've worked with, I like, and I want to help them out. But this is purely from the goodness of my heart to train someone. But because they are desperate, they can't finish their schooling without getting these 500 hours, which are incredibly subpar to the kind of training that I got. And I wish I had the time to give them the kind of training I had. but I can't, right? Because I'm not being compensated for it, and I still have to see the amount of patients I need to see to keep the
Right.
clinic running. This is the problem with these schools, is that it's completely subpar clinical training as compared to medical school, where we do have professors and people that are there to teach, that are compensated for teaching, that the rotations are set up so that we learn
Yep.
hands on.
This is again goes back to the incredible discrepancy between schools. Maybe some of the higher power schools have more organized stuff, but then I will push again. This is part of the industrial healthcare complex where those that are affiliated with big time medical schools may also have a nurse practitioner program, and
Right.
now the physicians, whether they want to or not, are going to be forced because they're employed by the institution that runs both to train nurse practitioners in addition to residents, in addition to medical students, with all various amount of training required to graduate.
Hmm.
And these are like, some of the elite institutions are doing that. And then they have fellowships that they call, which are not even close to the equivalency of what we do in fellowship. But then the, nurse practitioner or the doctorate of nurse practitioner can go out and say, yeah, I'm fellowship trained. Well, no, you're not. By no stretch are you fellowship trained in the physician equivalent setting, but you can, say that. That to me is a completely misleading situation, and they know it, but legally they can say it.
And then you have the
Mhm.
doctorate of nurse practitioners, which is mostly a PhD type program where you're doing advocacy work,
Right.
research, but
Right.
that doctorate is not based upon actual clinical experience. Those people can go out and call themselves now doctors,
Right.
right?
When the patient sees you, they're thinking medical doctor, not PhD doctor.
Right, exactly. And that distinction is often not made. But, that's not to say, though, that there are good and even great nurse practitioners out there.
Absolutely.
I have worked with several that are just fantastic. Several of them are very good friends of mine. And I am angry for them because they actually had bedside experience, before they did their NP training. They were RNs first in acute care settings. They had a lot of patient experience. And then they actually did the work and have a lot of experience being an NP, and they're actually excellent, excellent
Well, that's what it
practitioners.
was intended to do, was
Right.
initially to take people with, years of clinical experience. And so therefore they didn't need all the rotational experience because they had already accumulated, whether from spending 5 years in the ICU or spending 5 years as a L&D nurse or surgical nurse, whatever, they would have accumulated some of those things. What's happened is that these different schools have sprouted up, seen a niche that they can get involved in, and decided, hey, again, back to we can get tons of money, student loans. We've talked about those things before. Those don't get discharged, so they're going to get guaranteed money from the borrower and then pump out. It's not relevant to them if their students can't get jobs or anything like that. It's just, let's pump out as many as we can. I mean, the
Right.
rise to 39,000, that's almost double the number of graduating physicians. I think physicians are somewhere in the 22, 23,000, range. Maybe it's increased over the last few years, but I guarantee you the rise in NPs is going to continue.
And especially as a PCP, I see egregious errors that then fall onto me to fix,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
And so it puts the stress on the people that are still in the field. It reminds me of like that Ayn Rand book, The Atlas Shrugged, where like everyone's sort of like dropping out slowly, and
Yeah,
the stress gets more and more on the people that are still in the field trying to help people.
which
Like,
accelerates them getting out.
exactly, which
Yeah.
accelerates them getting out. It's because you're just seeing like people go to the ER and the diagnosis is just so vastly missed because of lack of knowledge. And then they get this urgent PCP follow up. I've
Right.
had several people that have gone to urgent cares and EDs and even specialists and seen NPs and PAs here in New York. And they come to me and they're in extremis. They are suffering, they are angry because they've spent so much money at these different institutions and have not gotten a fix for their issue. And then it falls to me to fix them, which thank God, most of the time I can. but it takes up a huge amount of my day, right? To
Absolutely.
try to sort out these very complex cases that turn into even more complex cases when we get a positive diagnosis. And then I have to get them to the right specialist as an outpatient, which takes forever. And oftentimes that requires me getting on the phone and calling in favors to get people in a timely fashion. Whereas it would be so much easier if they were in the hospital, right,
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
appropriate specialists available. But in any case, it just puts so much stress on the people that can help these people that are bouncing around looking for something, some help. It's an ever strained system that's getting worse and worse, right?
I will give you an example on the radiology side. Radiology does not currently, they have a program called radiology physician assistant, which, is starting that process, but we're very early in the realm that other specialties like anesthesia was obviously the earliest in this. And then other, nurse practitioners kind of are in the other fields as well. What's happened in this is that so radiology's volumes have exploded, and a lot of that, whether in the ER setting, comes from inappropriate utilization because everyone comes in with a headache or just a vague perceptional change and they assume stroke. And so now you've gone from not having any clinical background. So you're like, okay, this meets this criteria. I'll check this off. And they come in and not just a head CT, but a CT angio, head and neck, perfusion, and a brain MRI. It's all part of the flow sheet of workup. Now we're talking a $10,000 workup
Right.
that absolutely did not warrant it. And then on the outpatient side, because a lot of people, Arizona is a state where there's no supervision required for nurse practitioners. They can independently practice. I believe, I'm pretty sure that's the case. And so, they can order stuff, whatever they want. And they order so many more studies. And I think there was a study done, I think it was in JAMA last year, it came out about the utilization of imaging resources. And the association was basically that using non-physician professionals has led to a significant increase in imaging utilization,
Absolutely.
inappropriate imaging utilization.
And specialist consults. Recently, I'm going to share the story anonymously. I'm not going to identify the patient for the patient's protection, but I had an urgent PCP referral from an ED NP, right? The amazing irony of the situation is that it's when they go down the wrong pathway. The NP training utilizes algorithms, right? But if they choose the wrong algorithm, then
Right.
everything goes awry. So the patient had new onset seizures, young patient had new onset seizures, and they did a teleneurology consult with someone at a different facility. But here's the thing, you're talking about excessive imaging. In this case, they didn't order any imaging at all.
Wow.
So not even a head CT. And then they offered the patient an urgent new patient PCP follow-up. Like this was not a patient that was my patient yet. Didn't have a PCP, had gone to several urgent cares with the symptoms describing seizure-like episodes. Went to the ED, didn't get imaging, then came to me as a new patient with a history of I just got started on Keppra for new onset seizures, but I'm still having seizures and I haven't had any imaging. And of course he turns out to have a humongous mass in his brain
Yeah.
that I need to then, refer to neurosurgery. And obviously I can't, and trying to get him sorted out into the neurosurgeon on time. Thank God we had a neurosurgeon close by that got him in very quickly, because otherwise, it's either that or I told him he needs to go back to the ER. But of course, he does not want to go back because he didn't get
Yeah.
any help.
Yeah.
you know,
And that's
so
the
these
thing
patients
is,
will refuse. No, I just
yeah,
spent $3,000 in the ER not getting
right.
any imaging.
And rightfully upset. I can understand. And the thing is that you're talking about now major institutions. It used to be okay in the peripheral, smaller hospitals where they didn't have access, they would just take some, but now you're talking about major level one trauma centers, referral centers, that a patient can be in the hospital an entire stay and barely see a physician. They'll be,
Right.
admitted to GI pathway. So then they, from the ER nurse practitioner to the GI nurse practitioner to the and cardiology nurse practitioner, and there may not be a physician directly seeing that person.
And the only physician involved in that scenario may be an MD PCP, which happens to me
Yeah,
all the time. And I feel like
yeah,
I
yeah.
am supervising all of these NPs and PAs in
Right,
specialist
right, right.
offices. It's incredibly difficult and taxing thing for the physicians that are actually practicing to try to help patients and avoid catastrophic errors. But, we can't be at all places at all times. And again, this is an increasingly taxed and burdened system. Like you said, I think it's just a matter of time until people start having horrible outcomes and it becomes an actual issue. And, we're not able to save everyone, actual issue in the eyes of major media, which is why I think this article is really important because it is a major news media article that really points out one of the examples in this article is about how someone had an ectopic pregnancy that was identified on vacation, but they weren't told that it was an ectopic pregnancy. And she was sent back home and then died of massive hemorrhaging when that ectopic pregnancy ruptured. And, it says Nurse Belna saw no reason to frighten Ms. Dunbar with the prospect of dying from an ectopic pregnancy. So she didn't tell her. It's horrendous. And that actually gets to the point of NPAs having the perception of having better bedside manner. Let's talk about that a little bit. Do you think that's true?
I think they have better PR than physicians. Do I think they have better bedside? No, because they're people just like everyone. We've all dealt with nurses who are amazing with patients. I'm not talking about NPs specifically now. Right now, I'm just talking about nurses. We've all dealt with nurses who are not very good or mean and stuff like that. So I can't imagine that the spectrum of people going into nurse practitioner school have any variation on that. Just like physicians can be jerks and physicians can be nice. There's no training that I can say that their people are any better at dealing with patients.
I agree. There are good doctors and bad doctors, good people and bad people in all professions. But I feel like there is something to the bedside manner thing. Why? Because of our training. We get all these long hours and sleepless nights, 30-hour shifts, at least back in the day. And I almost felt like the humanity was somewhat beaten out of me in medical training just because of the amount of things we had to do, the sort of Green Beret-like training that we had to have. That often I found in my 10 years of practice now since training that I have the fear of being sued was so ingrained in my training, right? That a lot of it was defensive medicine, but a lot of it was like, don't miss this, don't miss this. You have to do this, you have to do this, right? So you are so focused on the medical side of it that you forget about the patient experience sometimes, right? I forgot about the patient experience sometimes. And of course, all the abuse, right? Abuse you take from attending physicians, from residents training you. It's a very toxic atmosphere. And sometimes that toxicity seeps into you a little bit, And the last 10 years of practice, I have slowly had to unlearn some of that toxicity and get back to let's just help this person, like forget about how you could be sued, like help people. Like that's why you went into this, right? And getting back to what the patient needs, even if takes more time, even if it put me at legal risk to give this advice to you. But, I'm going to do it anyway, because that's why I went into medicine. And that's the kind of thing I think that NPs don't have to actually learn or unlearn in their training because they have 500 hours, because they're not doing overnight shifts in the hospital during their training. I feel like a lot of the humanity gets preserved and doesn't have to be beaten out of them and then unlearned.
I mean, again, now I'm going to sound old school, but what we do is serious stuff. And yes, you get a toxic environment. Yes, you do some of these things. And I'm going to sound like the old person here, but some of it's for a reason, not all of it. And we've changed, we've evolved with times, like work hour restrictions have come into play, and they've changed exam formats. They've done a lot of things. Physicians learn slowly to change because the stuff that they've done over generations is worked, and they take out stuff that doesn't work slowly, or they add stuff and remove it when it doesn't work, things like that. But I just can't believe that the main thing you talk about is it's toxic, but you don't want to miss something. That's the stuff. If you miss stuff, that's a far more negative outcome than the positive patient experience, right? I'm not saying they shouldn't have a positive experience, and unlearning some of that toxicity is important. So can we improve our training programs? Absolutely. Can we improve our demeanors? Absolutely. Do we have a monopoly on patient grumpiness or poor bedside manner. No, we do not. And I will tell you that I've dealt with nurses who have been in the hospital setting for 20 plus years. They didn't go through that same training program, but they had tough working environments and they have grumpiness. And I've dealt with other nurses who've been there the same amount of time and are just super pleasant. So the work that we do in healthcare sometimes makes it that way, makes our tenure a little bit. By no stretch do I think that nurses have us at an advantage on that. I think that's pure publicity.
All right. Well, what do you think the future is? Look into your crystal ball.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Again, this is just the whole nature of healthcare in general in the US. I see a two-tier system going to be developing. And as you described, the more pressure that becomes put upon the physicians who are remaining, the more that they accelerate their departure. And a lot of them go towards concierge care, whether it's bailing out of insurance contracts, bailing out of poor toxic environments. And what comes in to fill that gap? It's going to be either physicians who couldn't get those kind of positions, or it's going to be nurse practitioners or other, physician assistants if they gain independent practice authority. I mean, these things are going to happen. I see a two-tier system developing. It's already happening. And I think it's just going to continue.
Describe that two-tier system for me a little bit more. Like, what does that mean for patients?
Meaning that if you have resources, really good insurance or money, you're going to be able to say, I want to see a physician. I want to see this physician. And if you don't, you're going to say, well, you take what you get. And, or if you have baseline insurance or government coverage or something like that, either you're going to go to a teaching institution, which is great for training purposes, but you may be in there, or there are other non-teaching pathway, and you'll see, nurse practitioners for all your care, specialty care, things like that. And then maybe down the line, nurse practitioners are advocating for procedural autonomy too. They're, endoscopies, vascular access. I remember a video a few years ago of a nurse practitioner doing liposuction, and there was, a negative outcome there, but just in general. So that's one part of the two-tier system. And then the other myth is that they are actually solving the lack of access. I mean, yeah, if you pump out a large number of people, some are going to go into that. But the percentages of them going to work in rural areas are probably not much better than the percentage of physicians going into rural areas. And a lot of them are going into specialty cares. And in states that they can open independent practice, they are doing that. I remember when I did my podcast, I learned about direct primary care. There's a nurse practice called direct primary care, completely capitalizing on the direct primary care side of medicine, but it's a fully nurse practice. I mean, that's not, a medical practice. That's a nursing practice or a nurse practitioner practice. But the patients don't know that. And again, physicians are so busy. We're fighting against insurance companies. We're fighting against health systems. We're fighting against all these other things. I think most of us are just getting tired of fighting on every front. A lot of physicians are also like, well, if you can't beat them, join them and they can pay me and I'll oversee a bunch of them.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about older physicians. A lot of the doc on doc crime in the recent generations have been older private practice physicians hiring a ton of NPs and PAs, physician extenders, and then not hiring other MDs just so that they can make more money, because they can see a lot more patients that way when they're supervising a whole bunch of NPs and PAs and, supervising in quotation marks because a lot of that is not supervised. So how can young physicians coming out of training with 18,000 hours of training compete in this market? Like, what can we do?
It's a good question. If I knew, I would be shouting it. But I think the reality is they have to, when they have these loans, when they have these burdens that these older physicians didn't have, a lot of them are now forced. When I say forced, not really forced, but, by all practicalities, they're like, I got to pay my loans back. Or I have to go for loan forgiveness because I have to work for a nonprofit institution. Nonprofit is definitely in quotes only. And so I can get loan forgiveness. They don't want to start their own practices, which I can't blame them. And so therefore now they're then being employed and being forced to supervise other non-physician providers who will eventually replace them. Hospitals are not stupid in that sense. They know they have training programs. They open their own nursing schools and they lump us all in as providers. And they're going to be like, yeah, doc, great. You graduated from, this elite institution and you did this fellowship, or, you're going to be a head of our primary care division. You also have to supervise these, 5 additional nurse practitioners, PAs, and we're going to open a training program so that we can increase our capacity for, this specialty service or this primary care division.
Oh,
They
and
don't
by the way, you also have to teach them.
Yes, yes, yes. That's
Right.
part of your job. And ultimately, what are they doing? They're training their replacements. And maybe not their own individual replacements, but the future physicians who are coming in behind them. Because now, what you described from the old physician private practice that did that, the hospitals are doing exactly the same thing. I advocate physicians to start their own practices only because, there are places. I actually work for a pretty solid employed group. So I'm happy with my individual situation, but I also know that the institution has the control. And at any point, they could indicate, different policies. Luckily, they've been, physician friendly in my division for sure. I can't speak to everything, but, I don't control that. And so I advocate to the next generation of physicians as early as you can. And I understand your financial burdens are higher than ever before. Try to get away from a situation where someone else is going to dictate to you. Now, a non-physician is going to dictate to you how you practice, how you care. And they may not say you have to, prescribe this medication exactly, but they will do everything that they can to funnel you into their pathways.
Oh, yeah. And I'm taking a risk here because I'm still employed.
Yeah, I'm employed as well.
Yes, but listen, I work in a setting where they tell us which medicines we can or cannot prescribe.
Exactly.
And that is already happening. And yes, I have been replaced by an NP in my own experience before, an NP
Right.
that I've been asked to train and supervise. And this is a personal experience. It's happened to me. I've been told to supervise NPs and PAs. And, and I do it. I still do it. There are many NPs and PAs that I love to work with. Because of them, we have a pretty manageable hospitalist program that is well staffed. So I'm not going to say that it's a bad thing overall that I have to do that. But at the same time, all the issues that we have just pointed out, the lack of supervision, it becomes a problem when there isn't physician supervision. And a lot of these NP mills, it's hard to tell how much training an NP has when they come to you for supervision. Well, it becomes very clear pretty quickly once you work with them. But
problem is when you don't have the supervision, like you said, the patients don't know, So yeah, that's the issue. Is that there's no national quality assurance. The
There's no standard.
LCME kind of accredits U.S. medical schools and Canadian medical schools. Whether you come from state school over here, a private school over here, or an Ivy League school, all physicians have to do a certain amount of clinical training, a certain amount of science knowledge, and then we extend that into residency training, no matter what field you go into. So, you can't just come out of medical school like you could in 1900 and hang your shingle up and practice. That doesn't happen anymore. But there's nothing, I don't think, in nurse practitioner school that would prevent you in an independent practice state from doing that with far less training. So, yeah, I think we're in the era that a Flexner report needs to come out again of nurse practitioner schools. And we could beat this issue to death. I will just say one other thing that I think is a problem. Let's say you're a nurse practitioner, you've been in, primary care for 5 years, you feel comfortable in it, but you're like, you know what? All the burdens that everyone describes in primary care, you're like, I'm over it, I'm done. You can go next week and start and work for a neurosurgeon, or you can go next week and start working for an orthopedic surgeon or a dermatologist and learn on the job. If you're a physician, you cannot do that. You have to go back and do fellowship or residency, depending on,
depending if you're going to surgery.
So why is that the case? Why are those of us who have significantly more training not allowed to work? And then they get paid full nurse practitioner salaries, or at least whatever the market rate is for what they're going into. We can't do that. We have to go back and suck up finding training spot, go back to resident salaries and, resident lifestyle and resident work hours, and then come out years after the fact. And then we can do it. So that is completely a double standard that I feel like, there's no real reason for this. The other thing that I will say is that, this has been primarily a US issue, but it's being exported to other countries. The UK, there's a lot of discussion on social media, nurse practitioners, PAs in the National Health Service in the UK.
Right.
So American corporations are exporting this type of care to others. And on the flip side, US makes it difficult, and probably rightfully so, for foreign trained physicians to come in with, vastly more training in the clinical setting to come in and do even basic work. Now, some of that is starting to change state by state. I think that's a good thing. But until something national happens, this trend will continue.
What about physician unions? Do they have a role?
Possibly. Outside of institutions, have you ever seen our national or statewide physician union?
I've seen them a couple of times. There's always the rumor that physicians can't unionize because practice owners can't unionize, but
Right.
employees can. I have seen a couple of unions pop up, but nothing powerful enough to really change the landscape thus far.
I think it's a good idea. And if you are in an employed system, I think it's a great idea. I don't see why you shouldn't do that, other than the institutions, of course, don't want you to do that. I think unions are one of the reasons that we don't see mid-level pilots. They always liken physicians to pilots, right? And everything. Oh, checklist, do this, do this. But I don't see anyone saying, oh, I want someone with less training to fly this 747.
Or like the air hostess knows the terminology that they're speaking in the cockpit. So why not? Let's let him fly the plane. Let's let her fly the plane. We don't
Exactly.
hear that. Yeah, exactly. That's because the point being pilots have unions.
Well, I mean, I think that helps them. So to your point, I think, that protects them. I'm sure the airline executives would love to figure out a way, because that's their biggest cost of labor is their pilots, right? I'm sure they would love to figure out a way to profit more and pay their employees less. But pilots have a very strong union. So yeah, I mean, maybe that could help. I don't know. The problem is that they will use, and that by they, I mean the health insurance industry, the big health systems will use that. See, physicians, they're just greedy. They just want to protect themselves. They just want to protect their income. So, we have to have equivalent PR, equivalent lobbying dollars, and we just don't, because we are too busy taking care of patients.
Right. And, there's an organization called Physicians for Patient Protection, which is doing really good work. Shout out. And that's the point here. And I think that I love the branding because it is really about patient protection.
Yes.
I mean, as much as it is about our job protection, but also we're the ones trying to help the patients and save them, right, from egregious errors.
We're all going to be patients. That's
right.
the
And
point,
we are
right?
all patients. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
If we're not already, right? And we all deserve standard of care, like a basic standard of care. And we all deserve to be able to choose our healthcare practitioners' training level, right? And if we are going to the hospital and paying MD rates, then we should be seeing the MD.
Exactly. They don't downprice the studies or the labs that they order because of who ordered it.
Right. And even the physician charge. There are ways, incident to billing, you could see an NP the entire visit and then still be billed the physician rate because of, the way certain codes work. And as long as there's a physician in the building, even if they're not supervising, they can be billing MD rates, and then that's what you're paying, And it's complete non-transparency of care, of billing. And it's terrible for patients. I've been on the patient side of the receiving end of all of that as well, and it's terrible for the physicians that are working because it's burdening them. It's at their cost that these institutions are making their profit margins, and that's the problem.
When you talk about transparency, another thing, like as you said, patients are not aware in general. They don't have a choice. One of the things that I've just seen on social media in the last few days, but I think it's maybe making its way back around in the circles, is that they may want to change the degree from DNP to MDN, something like that. So MND, maybe medical nursing doctorate or something like that. That makes it closer to MD.
As long as they get the training, give them the training. Like if they get 18,000 hours of clinical hours, fine. I'm fine with that.
Absolutely.
And then pass the USMLE.
Yes, exactly. To go to that point, I would say that yes, maybe that's what we need to be doing, is opening up more fellowships, like true fellowships, not, the shortened equivalents. Open up true fellowships and then say, okay, you've put in, your shifts. You've seen a lot of this stuff, because we can all agree that maybe some of our medical school training might have been extraneous, but most of our residency training and our fellowship training was not. And that's the part that you're really dealing with in terms of critical things in your field. And so I agree. I think we should maybe potentially open up pathways, because it's not going away for them to train, but they have to be equivalent pathways, not shortened versions of them.
Right. Well, these are all difficult issues that the answers are, unfortunately, they're going to take institutional level changes that we as individual people can hopefully affect by talking about it, by conversations like this. But we need governmental, institutional level change, and that's going to come slowly. In the meantime, Tarang, let's talk about your summer. How was your summer?
Busy.
Doing fun things?
Well, that, and it's Arizona, so it's super hot. So everyone tries to leave Arizona if they can for a little bit. So those who are back are working extra to catch up. But we visited my wife's parents in the East Coast, and we went to Hawaii for a week. Right before school, went to see my parents in Florida. We're just renovating our house, so that we had to move out of our house and go supervise the other house, a lot of stuff. And then just in general, the radiology workload nationally has just gone through the roof. So dealing with a little bit more extra work. But yeah, a lot of stuff happening. And still trying to protect physicians from, stupid investments.
Sounds fantastic. Well, I hope the renovation goes well. I know it's a stressful process, but it's always fun to enjoy the fruits of the renovation at the end.
Yeah.
So I hope that works out great for you, and sounds like a lovely summer. And we've had a lovely summer as well. I was just telling you, I took a lot of time this summer for self-care and went away to the mountains. We just came back from Mexico and had a fantastic time in Tulum. We got to ride dolphins, actually.
Nice.
Not just swim with them, but the dolphin came up and they had us grab onto her dorsal fin. Nushka was her name. She was a lovely dolphin. And the kids got to, ride on the dorsal fin of a dolphin as well.
That's awesome.
I mean, just amazing experiences. We're blessed. And life moves on, right? We deal with our professional challenges and, hopefully focus in on the positives and the beautiful experiences we get to have, because we do have the privilege of practicing medicine. And as little as job security as we're getting these days, at least we can still find other jobs.
They are always going to see you, come to see you. They're not coming to see your health system. They're not coming to see who donated. They're coming to see you. That's what I keep reminding other physicians is, at the end of the day, they're coming to see the person who gives them the care. We'll always have jobs.
Right, exactly. And sadly, I guess I should probably share at this point, I was recently let go from my practice for administrative convenience. They fired both doctors in my practice because we're both part-time and did not want to work full-time. And for purely financial reasons are letting us go so that they can replace us with one. Thank God I have other jobs. I also work as a hospitalist, but it really brings to light how tenuous our situation is. Yeah.
This is not tenuous. This is an opportunity. Oh my gosh. We can start a whole episode on this. This is an opportunity for you. You've got the personality for it. You've got the entrepreneurial spirit. This is definitely the opportunity for you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've been mulling on starting a DPC for a long time, and this is definitely one of those times where I'm thinking about it again, but I'm also working on my CFP at the moment. I also love finance. So I have a lot. I
started mine and then I never finished it. So
and so I'm looking forward to having more time to do that and to finish up the CFP and then see where life takes me. But life being what it is, I've been also at the same time been diagnosed with a chronic illness and I need surgery. So I know. So here it is, life happening, and thank God for financial wellness, right? Thank God I have disability insurance, and thank God I have savings to get me through this period and investments and stuff. So everything happens for a reason and life moves on, but there are always positives. And this podcast, this conversation with you, I count as one of the positive things in my life. And thank you to the listeners who have listened to this long rambling conversation today and support this podcast. So Tarang, thank you again for coming on.
I always enjoy coming on and talking to you.
Yeah, always. And it's always inspiring. And I just can't wait to see the great things you do in the future and things that you inspire me to do. So thanks again. And look forward to
Likewise,
having.
I'm looking forward to the next time I come on with you sharing your successes and your triumphs.
All right, guys, that wraps up another thought provoking conversation with Dr. Tarang Patel. And as always, controversial. It's clear that the roles of nurse practitioners in our healthcare system are evolving. And with that evolution comes both opportunities and challenges. As physicians, it's crucial that we stay informed and engaged in these discussions to ensure the best outcome for our patients. If you found today's episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue bringing you content that matters. You can also follow Dr. Patel on Twitter at Dr. Money Matters or join his Facebook group, Dr. Money Matters, for more insights on navigating the financial and professional challenges in medicine. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, your financial freedom is within reach. See you next time, and stay frugal, y'all.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.